It all started when we went skinny dipping. You like homilies that start with that line, don't you? We had moved to a new house in the summer when I was preparing to enter second grade, and I was worried that it would be hard to make friends in this new rural neighborhood. But one hot day, several of the new neighborhood boys asked me to go swimming with them in Mr. Brunner's pond. So off we went, 7 boys from the neighborhood, ages 6 through 8. And as we approached the pond, I realized that we had a problem. None of us had a swimsuit. "No problem," said one of them. "We just go skinny dipping." So we threw our clothes onto some boxwood bushes near the pond, and we jumped in. And it was one of those ponds where when you put your feet down, you can feel the mud oozing up between your toes. Oh, some of you have been skinny dipping, I see. And we were splashing around and having a great time. And then we heard it. We heard them. We heard 2 girls giggling from behind the boxwood bushes. Beth Brown, who to my chagrin, I later found out, was going into second grade, my class, and her sister Peggy, who was going to be in my brother's class. They were peeking up above the boxwood bushes and laughing at us. So we all submerged ourselves up to our necks in that muddy water and watched helplessly as the 2 girls walked up the lane, carrying our clothing with them. That, my friends, is how I met the remarkable young girl who would become my best friend in school. By first grade, I later found out, Beth knew that God had put her on earth to be a doctor by first grade. So she worked very hard at school. She studied everything with diligence. In the summers, when I was playing with frogs, she was taking advanced math classes at a community college. She was, of course, the valedictorian of our high school class, and just 5 years after we finished high school, she graduated from medical school. She got married to a doctor, of course. And 2 years later, after she was married, we were both home in that old neighborhood again for Christmas. She called and asked if I could come down for a visit. So we sat down on the couch. And then out of the blue, she said to me, "Michael, I'm dying of kidney cancer." For the next year, whenever both of us were home in that old neighborhood, we arranged a visit. And every time as I walked past that pond toward her house, I would have an internal dialogue, and I'd say to myself, Beth might die soon. So this time, this visit, tell her how much her friendship has meant to you over the years. Tell her how grateful you are. In other words, say the words that American males find tough to say. Beth, I love you. But every visit, every time, I let fear control me. So I never said those important things to my best friend. She died on April 2nd, 32 years ago. And as we stood by her grave, I cried because I had lost my best friend. And I cried because I had allowed fear to keep me from saying the most important things. I wonder if Mary Magdalene and the other women had tears in their eyes as they approached Jesus' tomb on that first Easter morning? I kind of suspect that they did. After all, they had come to believe that Jesus was the Messiah, and as they listened to his preaching and witnessed his miracles, their lives were completely changed by Jesus. And now, he was dead, horribly executed by the authorities, wrapped in a cloth, sealed in a tomb. That kind of loss usually leads to tears. John's gospel says that most of the male disciples spent that first Easter Sunday hiding behind locked doors. Why? John's gospel says that they were afraid. Perhaps afraid that the authorities would do to them what they had done to Jesus. Apparently, Mary Magdalene and the other women were not quite as afraid as the men, at least at first. Still, they have their worries that we heard about them in the gospel tonight. Who will roll away the stone for us? And then they're astonished by the emptiness of the tomb, the discarded burial cloths, the angelic figure announcing the strange news. And I quote, "Don't be amazed. Jesus is not here. He has been raised." As they stood at the tomb of Jesus, they heard the only news I know of which gives us hope as we stand by the tombs of people that we love. It also gives us hope when we contemplate our own tombs. What did the messenger say in the tomb to the women? He has been raised. Death has been conquered. For every human being, and in fact for the whole of creation, death no longer gets the last word in our story. Life does, and hate doesn't win. Love does, and despair gives way to hope, since our God went into the tomb and refused to stay dead. Quite frankly, brothers and sisters, if the resurrection isn't true, then we shouldn't be here tonight. As St. Paul says elsewhere, if Christ is not risen, then we are the most pitiable of people. If Christ isn't risen, then how does our life have purpose? If Christ isn't risen, death swallows us up into silent meaninglessness. If Christ isn't risen, I should be overwhelmed with the despair and tragedy of Beth's grave and every other grave I've ever stood by. But because Christ is risen, I can stand beside her grave and every grave, knowing that the souls of the just are in the hand of God. Tears, terrors, tombs, all conquered by the world-changing fact that the women encountered at the cemetery. What did that guy say in the tomb? He is not here. He has been raised. The women not only hear the message, they're commanded to go and announce this good news to everyone, starting with those frightened apostles hiding behind the locked doors. Go and tell his disciples, the angel said. And that's how the Easter story ends in Mark's gospel. Oh, wait a minute, I just lied to you in church of all places. Actually, there are two additional verses in Mark's gospel, verses not included in the official liturgical books that we use tonight. They're verses in the Bible They just were dropped by the editors who put together the readings for Mass tonight. And in those 2 additional verses, at the end of this scene, Mark says that once the women hear this command to go share the good news of God's triumphant love, they leave the tomb trembling. That's probably understandable. And then Mark says, they said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. They said nothing to anyone because they were afraid. At which point, I want to become the reincarnation of Dr. Phil and shout at them, "What are you thinking?" Ladies, you are the first human beings to find out that death doesn't control us in the end. You're the first human beings to learn that God's love is stronger than death. The angel told you to say something, and you said nothing because you were afraid. Why would Mark describe female disciples who are so afraid that they don't say the most important thing ever? Well, maybe Mark knew that at some point in the future, there'd be a fellow in Pennsylvania who would allow fear to keep me from saying to his friend the important thing, "Beth, I love you." Maybe Mark understood that we humans, even humans who believe in Jesus, still give fear way too much power in our lives. It is true, these gospel women stayed afraid and silent for a while. But clearly there came a point when they decided that love should guide their lives, not fear. Eventually, they conquer their fears. How do I know that? Because we're here tonight. We are here tonight because the frightened women became brave, and the silent women started preaching. He is not here. He is risen. Have you noticed how often fear tries to tie our tongues or tie us up into inaction? It's not just when your best friend is dying of kidney cancer, or when your spouse develops Parkinson's, or the love of your life forgets your name because of Alzheimer's. Fear tries to convince us that there's nothing we can say, nothing we can do, nothing we should hope for. Let's be honest. Hasn't the past year been full of fear? See, if we were at a Baptist church, you would all shout amen right now. Let's try that again. Let's be honest. Hasn't the last year been full of fear? Amen. Thank you. Fear has been at work. Fear has been at work in a pandemic, in illness, in isolation, in disconnection. Fear has been at work in a political and cultural system that seems untethered from basic goodness, untethered from justice, untethered from honesty. Fear has been at work in families where daily struggles, where job loss, where business collapse makes people wonder about what tomorrow holds. Fear is at work in a world where our problems are big and our solutions seem so small. There are scary things in the world, but the scariest thing of all, death, has been conquered by the love of God. And if God's love has conquered that enemy, why do I allow fear to silence me at any other time? What was the message of the guy in white in the tomb? He is not here. He has been raised. 2,000 years ago, our frightened world needed to hear that message. Thankfully, with God's help, the frightened women shared the good news. Tonight, our frightened world still needs to hear that same message. So jump on in and let the risen Lord wash your fears away through the waters of baptism. And then we can all go out to wherever there are frightened people and proclaim with honest boldness, He is risen. May the Lord be praised now and forever. Amen.